The 1976 Chowchilla kidnapping has been called the largest kidnapping for ransom in American history, a case that sparked a massive manhunt, a media frenzy, and a desperate race against time. It was a hot summer day on July 15, 1976, in the small town of Chowchilla, California. Chowchilla is located in the Central Valley, about 150 miles southeast of San Francisco. It's a rural community, mostly known for its dairy farms and almond orchards. The population at the time was around 5,000 people, and as was typical of similar small towns in those days, most of them knew each other by name. That afternoon, a group of 26 children, aged 5 to 14, boarded a yellow school bus driven by 55-year-old Edward Ray. They were returning from a field trip to the local swimming pool as part of a summer school program. The children were excited, tired, and hungry. They had no idea that their lives were about to change forever. As the bus approached a railroad crossing on Avenue 21, a white van suddenly stopped and blocked its path. The driver of the van, wearing a nylon stocking over his face, got out and waved a handgun at Ray. He ordered him to stop the bus and open the door. Ray complied, thinking it was a robbery. He hoped that the man would just take the money and leave. But he was wrong. Two more men, also wearing stockings over their faces, emerged from the van. Climbing onto the bus and waving their shotguns around, they told Ray and the children to stay calm and do as they say. Making an announcement that they were only going to take them for a ride and that they would be back soon, they said they were not going to hurt anyone. Unfortunately, they were lying. The men forced Ray to drive the bus to a remote spot in the countryside, where another van was waiting. They transferred the children and Ray to the second van, which had no windows and no seats. Making everyone lie down on the floor, the men covered them with mattresses and drove for about 11 hours, stopping several times to switch drivers and vehicles. They drove through the night, across the state, to a place where no one would find them. The place was an old quarry near Livermore, about 100 miles from Chowchilla. The quarry was owned by the father of one of the kidnappers, who had no idea what his son was up to. The kidnappers had prepared a makeshift prison in the quarry, using a moving van that they had buried under several feet of dirt and rocks. The van had been modified with a ventilation system, a battery-powered fan, some food and water, and some mattresses. It was a dark, cramped, and suffocating space. It was a tomb. The kidnappers dragged Ray and the children out of the vehicle and forced them to climb down a ladder into the buried van. The children were told that their parents and the authorities would be contacted, and a demand for a ransom of $5 million would be made for their release. They told them to stay quiet and wait for their instructions, and said they would be back soon. But they weren't. The kidnappers left the quarry and drove to a nearby payphone. They tried to call the Chowchilla police, but the line was busy. They tried again and again over the next few hours, but they couldn't get through. What they hadn't considered was that the police station would be overwhelmed with calls from frantic parents who had realized that their children hadn't come home from the field trip and had then called the police in a panic. They didn't know that the police had already found the abandoned school bus and had launched a massive search operation. They didn't know that the FBI had joined the investigation and that the media had picked up the story and were broadcasting it nationwide. And they didn't know that they had triggered a panic, created chaos, and a nightmare for everyone involved. But they would soon find out. Deciding to wait until the next morning before trying to call the police again, they drove to a motel in Santa Clara and checked in under fake names. Turning on the TV and watching the news, the kidnappers saw the faces of the children and Ray, who they had left buried in the quarry. They saw the anguish of the parents, who didn't know where their children were or if they were alive, and the efforts of the police, who didn't have any clues or any suspects. The dawning realization of the magnitude of their crime and the consequences of their actions quickly came over them. They'd made a huge and terrible mistake, but it was too late to back out now. The children and Ray spent a terrifying night in the buried van, not knowing if they would ever see their families again. Everyone tried to stay calm and hopeful, but they were scared, hungry, thirsty, and exhausted. With no light, no air conditioning, and no proper toilet, the only sound they could hear was the fan that was supposed to provide them with fresh air. But it wasn't enough. The temperature inside the van rose to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 38 degrees Celsius, and the oxygen level dropped dangerously low. They felt like they were suffocating. Ray, who had been injured by the kidnappers, tried to comfort and reassure the children by telling them stories, singing songs, and praying with them. He scanned the interior of the van, looking for some kind of way out. He noticed that the kidnappers had left some tools and supplies in the van, such as a flashlight, a hammer, and some water bottles. Using the flashlight to inspect the van, Ray found a metal plate that covered the hole where the ladder had been. He realized that the plate was weighed down from above and could possibly be moved with enough force, but decided to wait until the morning, when the kidnappers were supposed to return, and then try to open the plate and climb out of the van once they had left again. Morning came, but the kidnappers didn't. They had overslept in the motel and missed their chance to call the police. Deciding to wait until the afternoon to try again, the trio hoped that the children and Ray were still alive and that they could still get their money. They didn't know that their captives were running out of time and that they were about to make a move of their own. Around noon, Ray decided that he couldn't wait any longer. He told the children that he was going to try to open the plate and that they should help him. He asked some of the older children to hold the flashlight and the water bottles, and instructed some of the younger children to stay back and be quiet. Stacking the mattresses on top of each other, Ray was able to reach the metal plate that formed the entrance to the van. As he lifted the hatch, he told one of the older children to wedge a piece of wood into the opening. Fresh air and a ray of sunlight crept into the van. Standing on the mattresses, the dirt and rocks that covered it could be seen. He felt a surge of hope and shouted to the children that this was their chance to escape. Ray told the children to follow him, but be careful as he started to dig his way out of the dirt and rocks. He used his hands, feet, and the hammer to slowly but surely push through the barrier that was keeping them prisoner. It took a long time until Ray finally broke through and reached the surface. He looked around and saw that he was in a quarry surrounded by hills and trees. There was a guard shack and a phone booth. This was it. They had made it. They were free. One by one, Ray helped the children climb out of the hole. They were dirty, sweaty, and tired, but they were also relieved, happy, and grateful. They hugged each other and thanked Ray for saving them before running to the phone booth and calling the police. Ray told them who they were, where they had been held, and what had happened to them. He asked them to come and get them and tell the parents that their children were now safe. The police arrived at the quarry quickly and were amazed and relieved to find them alive and well after more than 24 hours in captivity. They hugged them, congratulated them, and praised them for their courage and resilience. Taking their statements and collecting evidence from the buried van and surrounding area, they then contacted their parents and arranged for their transportation back to Chowchilla. They also alerted the media, who announced the good news to the public. The children and Ray were hailed as heroes, and their story became a sensation. Meanwhile, the three kidnappers were still in their motel room, preparing to make their $5 million ransom demand phone call to the police. Turning on the television, they switched on the news and couldn't believe what they were seeing. Somehow, Ray and the children had escaped. Their carefully planned scheme had failed, and now they were sure to be found out and captured. Deciding to split up, they left the motel and made a run for it. By this time, the FBI had discovered who the kidnappers were and had issued several warrants for their arrest. They were identified as Frederick Newhall Woods IV, James Schoenfeld, and Richard Schoenfeld, three young men from wealthy families in the Bay Area. 8 days after the kidnapping, Richard Schoenfeld voluntarily surrendered himself to authorities. 2 weeks later, James Schoenfeld was arrested in Menlo Park, a city in the San Francisco Bay Area, and later that same day, Woods was arrested by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. He was subsequently returned to the U.S. to stand trial for his crime. All three confessed to the kidnapping and explained that their motive was purely financial, as, despite coming from wealthy families, they were in deep debt and needed money to pay off their creditors. When questioned for further details, the police found out that they had planned the kidnapping for more than a year and had studied the school bus route and arranged everything at the quarry. Stating that they didn't intend to harm the children or Ray, the kidnappers claimed that they were sorry for what they had done and that it was all just a terrible mistake. But it was too late. The three were charged with 27 counts of kidnapping for ransom and faced life imprisonment without parole. They pleaded guilty and hoped for leniency, claiming that they were not violent criminals, but just misguided youths who had made a bad decision. They also claimed that they had been influenced by a movie called Dirty Harry, which featured a similar kidnapping plot, and asked for forgiveness and mercy. However, it was not to be. The judge, who presided over their sentencing, was not impressed by their excuses and said that they had committed a heinous crime, showing no regard for the lives and well-being of their victims. He said that they had caused immense suffering and trauma to the children, Ray, and their families. In light of these facts, they therefore deserved the maximum penalty, and the judge said that he had no sympathy for them. The kidnappers were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole and ordered to pay restitution to their victims. He said that they had forfeited their right to freedom and that they had to pay for their crime. Each one was sent to a different prison where they would spend the next few decades behind bars. They appealed their sentences several times, succeeding to be resentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Over the next few years, they applied for this parole many times but were rejected. They maintained that they'd changed and that they'd become model prisoners, that they had remorse and had tried to make amends. They said that they'd served enough time and that after all these years, deserved a second chance. Richard Schoenfeld, aged 22 during the kidnapping, was paroled in 2012 at age 57. James Schoenfeld, aged 24 during the kidnapping, was paroled on August 7, 2015 at age 63. In October 2019, Woods was denied parole for the 19th time. In March 2022, a panel of 2 commissioners recommended Woods for parole. The recommendation required the approval of the full parole board, the board's legal division, and California's governor. Governor Gavin Newsom asked the board to reconsider, but the decision was authorized. On August 17, 2022, it was reported that Woods' parole had been granted and he was released from prison. The children and Ray, on the other hand, tried to move on with their lives and to overcome their ordeal. They returned to Chowchilla, where they were welcomed by their families and friends and received counseling, support, and care. People all over the country who had been touched by their story sent them letters, gifts, and donations. They tried to resume their normal activities, to forget their terrible nightmare and to heal, but unfortunately, they didn't. Both Ray and the children suffered from various physical and psychological problems, such as nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. They had trouble sleeping, eating, and concentrating, as well as difficulty in trusting and socializing. Just living and being happy was a challenge. Whilst they had survived, they had never recovered. Everyone said that they had been scarred and that they had never been the same. The children and Ray also kept in touch with each other and formed a bond that lasted for years. They shared their experiences, their feelings, and their struggles, comforting and helping each other, and celebrating each other's achievements. They became a family and a source of strength. Even though they'd been through hell, they had not been alone. Ray received a California School Employees Association citation for outstanding community service. Before he died on May 17, 2012, he was visited by many of the school children that he had helped save. In 2015, Chowchilla renamed the Sports and Leisure Park as the Edward Ray Park and declared every February 26th, Ray's birthday, as Edward Ray Day. Ray and the children may have been victims, but it was clear that they had also been heroes. We should ask ourselves, if we were faced with a similar overwhelming challenge, is there a hero in us too? Hi. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed anything about what you've just seen, then please hit that like and subscribe button. We're just getting started, so you'd be doing me a huge favor. It really helps out a small channel like this one. I hope we earned your subscription today, but if we didn't, I promise we'll keep making great videos until we do. Join us next time when together we'll once again enter the darkness.